There comes a quiet moment in a man's life when fear stops shouting and begins whispering instead. For Mark Henderson, that moment arrived at 52, standing alone on a weather-beaten dock with eviction papers folded in his jacket pocket. The world had moved on without him. 30 years of maritime engineering, bridges, platforms, ships that survived hurricanes, meant nothing in an economy that preferred younger hands and cheaper resumes. His savings were gone. His wife was gone. And now the small house that still smelled faintly of her perfume was about to be gone too. Across the water sat a massive cruise ship, abandoned, rust streaking down her hull like dried tears. People laughed at it. Worthless, they said, a floating corpse waiting to be cut apart. Mark stared at her lines, her structure, the quiet dignity beneath decay. His daughter's voice echoed in his head, begging him not to do anything reckless. His brother's voice followed, sharp with judgment and logic. But something deeper stirred, an instinct sharpened by decades of knowing how things were built and why they failed. The auction notice said $2,500. Mark had $3,000 to his name, 2 months of rent or one impossible gamble. He closed his eyes and thought of his late wife's words, opportunities rarely look safe. When he opened them again, his decision was already made. Some men surrender quietly. Others choose one last fight, even when the odds laugh back. The auction room smelled of stale coffee and disinterest. Salvage dealers flipped catalogs without looking up. Scrap buyers whispered numbers under their breath, already calculating what wasn't worth their time. When the abandoned ship's name was announced, a ripple of amusement passed through the room. Opening bid $2,500, the auctioneer called, barely hiding a smirk. Silence followed. Then Mark raised his card, heads turned, someone chuckled. No one followed. The gavel fell, sharp and final. Just like that, Mark Henderson owned a decaying cruise ship and exactly $500 left to his name. The weight of the decision hit him later, alone in his car, staring at the rusted keys in his palm. That night his daughter cried in his kitchen. "Dad, this isn't brave, it's crazy," she said, voice breaking. Mark listened, said little, and packed boxes in silence after she left. The next morning he climbed the gangway alone. The ship groaned beneath his boots, metal protesting after years of neglect. Inside, pools of rainwater reflected broken ceilings. Furniture stood frozen in decay. Yet beneath the ruin, Mark saw something unmistakable: solid bones, intentional design, strength that hadn't been erased by time. This ship hadn't died, it had been forgotten. By sunset, exhaustion wrapped around him like a blanket, but so did something else: purpose. For the first time since losing his job, Mark didn't feel useless, he felt needed. Days turned into methodical exploration. Mark slept in his car, then on the ship itself, learning her sounds, her moods, her hidden rhythms. He worked the way he always had, slowly, precisely, refusing shortcuts. On the bridge, he found instruments coated in dust but intact. In the captain's quarters, sealed by corrosion and time, he discovered a leather-bound logbook that changed everything. The entries began normally, weather, routes, passengers, but soon shifted. Mentions of private modifications, sealed compartments, an owner who demanded discretion. The name appeared again and again: Preston Blackwell, wealthy, paranoid. Gone without explanation in the late 1950s. Mark's pulse quickened as he read. Ships didn't receive secret compartments without reason. He photographed pages, cross-referenced blueprints, and realized the official plans didn't match reality. Hidden spaces existed, carefully designed, intentionally concealed. When his daughter finally joined him aboard, curiosity replaced anger. Together, they pried open a concealed panel and uncovered antique navigation instruments. Rare, valuable, preserved with care. Historians soon arrived, appraisers followed. Whispers spread through the harbor. Mark listened as experts spoke numbers he could barely process. 6 figures, then more, but amid the rising attention, Mark felt unease. This wasn't just money. Someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to hide these artifacts. Why protect them, only to abandon them forever? Late one night, sitting alone in the captain's quarters, Mark realized he wasn't chasing wealth anymore. He was chasing understanding. The ship wasn't a gamble, it was a story waiting to be told, and he had become its custodian. As discoveries multiplied, so did pressure. Lawyers warned of claims, collectors made aggressive offers. Reporters asked how it felt to go from eviction to fortune. Mark answered carefully, always deflecting attention away from himself. He wasn't comfortable being called lucky. Luck implied accident. This was intention, patience, and responsibility colliding at the right moment. When deeper compartments revealed historically significant charts and instruments tied to legendary expeditions, the stakes rose again. Museums expressed interest. His brother, once dismissive, now arrived with spreadsheets and legal plans. "You're standing on a knife's edge," he said. "Handle this wrong and it all collapses." Mark knew he was right. Yet every night, walking the decks alone, Mark felt the ship asking a different question. Not what the artifacts were worth, but what they deserved to become. He thought of his daughter's students, of forgotten history locked behind museum glass, of a ship once admired now dismissed as junk. Selling everything would solve his problems instantly. It would also erase something rare, the chance to turn survival into meaning. When a local historian proposed transforming the ship into a maritime heritage center, the idea landed softly but firmly in Mark's chest. It felt right, risky, yes, but so had buying the ship. At 52, Mark understood something he hadn't at 30: security fades, purpose endures. And sometimes the bravest investment isn't the one that pays you back, but the one that gives something forward. The final discovery came quietly, hidden behind a wall even the secret blueprints hadn't revealed. Inside a small private cabin lay a simple wooden chest and a letter written by the ship's former owner. Mark read it slowly, each line heavier than the last. The man confessed to faking his death, to running from investigations, to hiding wealth he never lived long enough to reclaim. Gold coins spilled from the chest when it opened, millions by modern standards, but the real weight rested in the words. "Fear trapped me more than any prison." Mark sat in silence long after finishing the letter, the ship creaking around him like a living witness. When he showed the letter to his daughter, she didn't reach for the gold. She reached for his hand. Together they decided. Some treasures would fund security, others would remain preserved and shared. A scholarship would be created. The ship would become a museum. The past would serve the future. Opening day arrived under clear skies. Visitors filled the dock. Children stared wide-eyed at instruments once used to map the world. An elderly woman, the former owner's daughter, stood quietly before her father's letter, tears in her eyes. Mark watched from the deck, overwhelmed not by wealth but by connection. He had arrived broken, desperate, nearly invisible. He stood now surrounded by community, history, and purpose. Money had saved him from eviction. Meaning had saved him from emptiness. In the weeks that followed, life settled into a rhythm Mark never expected to know again. The ship no longer groaned in isolation. It hummed with voices, footsteps, curiosity. Volunteers arrived early each morning. Students asked questions that reminded him why preservation mattered. His daughter left her teaching job temporarily to build educational programs aboard the ship, her laughter echoing through hallways once abandoned. Mark remained in the captain's quarters, not as an owner guarding treasure, but as a caretaker honoring responsibility. The gold coins were carefully inventoried. Some sold to secure the museum's future, others displayed to tell a cautionary story about wealth without integrity. Visitors lingered longest in the small exhibit holding the brass compass engraved true north. Mark often stood nearby, listening. He heard people speak about second chances, about choices made too late or just in time. He realized the ship had given him something deeper than financial rescue. It had restored his belief that age didn't erase relevance, that experience still mattered, that courage could arrive quietly and still change everything. On calm evenings, Mark would walk the deck alone, watching the harbor lights shimmer on the water. He thought about the man who once hid here in fear and the man he himself had almost become. The difference wasn't intelligence or luck, it was direction. When Mark had nothing left, he chose forward, not safe, not certain, but honest. And that choice had reshaped his life more completely than any discovery hidden behind steel walls. Years later, visitors would ask Mark how it felt to risk everything on a single decision. He never answered with numbers. He spoke instead about listening, to instincts shaped by experience, to fear without surrendering to it, to responsibility when opportunity arrived disguised as ruin. He told them that losing everything had stripped away illusions, leaving only truth. That truth led him to a rusted ship no one wanted and a future he hadn't imagined. The museum grew. Scholarships funded generations of students. The ship became a landmark, not because of gold or artifacts, but because of what it represented: resilience, redemption, and stewardship. Mark aged gently, surrounded by purpose rather than regret. His daughter built a life rooted in service and story. On quiet mornings, Mark would still sit with a cup of coffee, hand resting on the old compass, smiling at how narrowly he'd avoided becoming another cautionary tale. Fear had nearly written his ending. Choice rewrote it. Visitors often left the ship quieter than they arrived, thinking about their own lives, their own abandoned opportunities waiting patiently at forgotten docks. Mark never claimed to be extraordinary. He insisted he'd simply refused to quit when quitting seemed reasonable. And that, he believed, was the only difference between a life that shrinks and one that expands, long after the money is counted and spent. In the end, Mark understood what the ship had been trying to teach him all along. Value is not always visible. Some things look ruined because no one has taken the time to see what still holds. People, like ships, are often discarded not because they are broken, but because restoring them requires patience and belief. Mark's story was never about hidden gold or rare